Everything looks good, Carrie. Well, it is 12 o'clock, Happy Valley time. And it is time for our virtual speaker series. Welcome, everybody. I see the Zoom room is filling up. I see we are live streaming on Facebook. Welcome to the Penn State Alumni Association's virtual speaker session. Today, we talk with Shara McCallum. She is an English professor. She is the Penn State Laureate, and we're going to be talking about her book, No Ruined Stone. If you have questions for Shara, you can drop them in the Q&A tab on Zoom or put them in the comments on Facebook. As always, we'd love to know who you are and where you're zooming in from or where you're watching us from. Go ahead and let us know in the chat or in the comments where you're watching from. We'll be getting started in just a minute. Thanks for joining us on the virtual speaker series. I see Jay in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Jay. Thanks for joining us. We have a great program lined up today with Penn State's Laureate, Shara McCallum, will be joining us, talking about her book, No Ruined Stone, and the work that she does here at Penn State. She is the Edwin Erle Sparks Professor of English and was recently appointed the 21-22 Penn State Laureate. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's program. Natalie is here in State College. I see Kofi from Ghana in West Africa. Might be our first African participant in the virtual speaker series. Welcome, Kofi. We'll be getting started in just a moment. Thanks for zooming in. Where else would you rather be than a Zoom full of Penn Staters? I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's virtual speaker session, which is being recorded. Live closed captions are available for this session. You can access them by clicking the closed caption button at the bottom of the Zoom video window, and then clicking Show Subtitle. You may also customize your caption view by clicking the Stream the Text link posted in the chat. We are live streaming today's presentation, and this live stream has been made possible through the gracious support of a donor and the Fund for Access, Ideas, and Audacious Goals. Today's presentation will be archived and available on our website after the event. This afternoon, we welcome Penn State Laureate Shara McCallum. No Ruined Stone is a novel in verse written by the 2021-2022 Penn State Laureate Shara McCallum that offers a speculative account of history based on 18th century Scottish poet Robert Burns' planned migration to Jamaica to work on a slave plantation. In No Ruined Stone, McCallum's lyric, poetics, and imagination meets the historical archive and she explores anew several subjects she had long pursued as a writer, including race, colonialism, migration, memory, and exile. Stay tuned for a reading by McCallum from No Runestone, followed by Q&A with the audience. For more on today's guest, Shara was from Jamaica and born of a Jamaican father and Venezuelan mother. Shara McCallum is the author of 6 books published in the United States and the United Kingdom, including No Runestone, just released in 2021. La Historia, History is a Room, an anthology of poems selected from across her 6 books and translated into Spanish by Adalber Salas Hernández, was also published this year. At Penn State, McCallum is the Edwin Erle Sparks Professor of English and was appointed the 2021-22 Penn State Laureate. Thank you for joining us, Professor and Penn State Laureate Shara McCallum. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah?
Sounds great.
Okay, perfect. So I might be a bit in shadow. I'm going to turn this off. If I get out of this view of the frame, let me know, because I don't like to look at myself when I'm speaking. I don't know who does really, but I'm not one of those. So what I wanted to start off by saying is thank you for coming to a virtual event. I am as interested as anything in the conversation that we can have today about history, about poetry, about the way in which this book speaks to poems of capacity to make us reinvestigate history. The particular side of history that I'm interested in is the history of slavery, the intersection of Jamaica and Scotland, colonialism. So think, late 18th century, early 19th century, because that's where we're going to be in this book. I'm a poet who, as Paul mentioned, has long written about these subjects, but this is the most direct and narrative treatment of these subjects. And I'll say more about that perhaps in the conversation if that's at all interesting to people to hear about process of writing. But to start with, I'll just say why I wrote this book. And let me back up also for a moment to thank Paul and Carrie for hosting me. Everybody associated with the Alumni Association for thinking to include a poet on the speaker series. That is not always a given. That's one of the reasons it's a great pleasure to be the Penn State Laureate, is I get to speak about an art that has meant a huge amount to me in my life. And often I know people are unfamiliar with it. So that's just to say thank you again to the Alumni Association for making this part of the series. Why this book? There are so many reasons I wrote this book. One of them is going back to the very core of who I am. All my life, when people meet me, if they see my surname, McCallum, I don't know if you can see that in the view, and they see me, I often will be asked the question, are you Scottish? And what I have to say to people at that moment, and what I've usually just said is, if I am, perhaps not in the way you are imagining. This is a patrilineal name. My father's father was a Black Jamaican, and I am from Jamaica. My mother is Venezuelan. She herself was an immigrant to Jamaica. So, that's a complicated answer to a pretty basic question. I understand why people ask. I'm not unaware. Have a mirror. I like to joke with people. But I don't usually have the time to get into a long discourse on history and genetics and biology and race. So I usually leave it at that. But I come back to this because I think that a lot of times as writers, we are pursuing questions that we have lived with our whole life. The ostensible question of this book came to me not until 2015, but the particulars of my lived existence as as a woman of color, as a Black woman who looks white, as a migrant, as somebody who is interested in history, those are longstanding questions for me of what does the historical record teach us and what does it leave out? When in 2015, I was living in the UK and I visited Scotland, I was naturally asked again, are you here, looking for your tartan? Many, Scots or people of Scots ancestry do go. And so it's a genuinely good question. And when I answered no, I was actually here as a poet to give a reading, and that I was not Scottish, in fact, but Jamaican, that is when I learned the story of Robert Burns that spurred this book. So I think what I'll do is I'll just read a few poems. I wanted to give you a little bit of a personal approach to why I wrote this, to hear some of these poems. And then I'll tell you a bit about the history as I go along. I'm only going to read a handful because I'm aware that you've all come here, I hope, with questions or comments, or we'll soon have some for me, and we can have, as much as a Zoom webinar allows, a conversation. So I'm going to read the first poem because this poem really gives the stakes of the project. It outlines quite clearly why I wrote this. And this is me speaking to Robert Burns. Before I read it, let me just back up for 1 minute and say, if you don't know who Robert Burns is, if that name is not ringing a bell, I'm going to sing something to you, and then I think you will know exactly who Robert Burns is. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and old lang syne? That's Robert Burns. No ruined stone, and I'm speaking to Burns here. You saturate the sight of those who come after, poets and painters alike. Your words invade my mind's listening, manacle my tongue when I try to speak. On all I backward cast my eye and fear and cannot see. Who would I have been to you? What stone in the ruined house of the past? In this world, I am unloosed, belonging to no country, no tribe, no clan, not African, not Scotland. And you, voice that stalks my waking and dreaming, you, more myth than man, cannot unmake history. So why am I here, resurrecting you to speak, when your silence gulfs centuries? Why do I find myself on your doorstep, knocking, when I know the dead will never answer? So that was the first poem I wrote. And after that, I actually resurrected the dead. I said the dead won't ever answer, and then I went ahead and called them back. In particular, the first half of the book is set in 1786 to 96. As Paul mentioned in the introduction, I'm not sure, I'm assuming people in the audience are listening here haven't read the book. So I'm going to give some more context as a result of that. But the Robert Burns I knew from that song that many of us sing every New Year's Eve, and actually for me from poems that I loved and studied as an undergraduate, that Burns was a man who believed in equality, in ideals of the Enlightenment, and of democracy that we continue, I think, to live in the 21st century, hundreds of years later, with its incomplete vision being realized. But it is a beautiful vision that all men, we know now that the people who penned that did imagine it quite prescriptively. And that's the moment into which this book basically arrives, is that somebody like Burns, who definitely believed in those ideals, as I say in that first poem, wouldn't have envisioned them necessarily applying to somebody like me. And I think he was a very complex figure, the man, the thinker. And the complexity that really struck me is that he was prepared to go to work on a slave plantation. So that's the Burns that I bring back in this book, is the one who actually goes to Jamaica. In the conversation we're going to have, I'll explain if you want more information about why he didn't actually go. But in the book, you have to remember that he does go. I transplant him for the last 10 years of his life in Jamaica. And I'll read a poem that is toward the beginning of his time there, where the Burns who holds these visions of humanity and the Burns who has agreed to go and is now there is dealing with what exactly he has done in arriving. Douglas, just a couple things that are unfamiliar perhaps. Douglas is the name of the real person. Two men who were also from Scotland owned the plantation that Burns would have gone to work on. And so Douglas is mentioned here. Airmount is one of the names that Douglas's gave to the plantation. Another life. This is Robert Burns speaking. Douglas calls this place Airmount, remapping for Scotia, the island. But not even the air of home casts such alchemical light. Every red quickly turned to blood and rust. What in man yokes us to the past? What name could contain the history of any tract of land? This promontory facing the sea backward casts its gaze across the Rio Grande Valley, lifts its eyes toward the Blue Mountains. It has done so long before we came, will do so well after we are dust. While the air I knew, another life corrodes inside of this one. As Burns lives out the last 10 years of his life on that plantation, the fictive Burns in my account of history, he becomes involved with an enslaved African woman named Nancy. They have a child, and when Nancy is pregnant, Burns goes to the owner of the plantation, that same Douglas, and asks if he can free her, asks if he can free Nancy and his child. And the response from Douglas is, do you have the money? They're my property. And Burns, I'm afraid you don't even have the money to get yourself out of this predicament that you've put yourself into by coming here. You don't have the money to even go back to Scotland at this point. So Burns lives out the 10 years knowing that and watching his child grow up in slavery. He realizes that he has failed to be able to protect her or Nancy. He also, the whole time he's in Scotland, in Jamaica, he's sending poems and songs he's writing back to Scotland because he still has all the ambition and desire to be the great poet. Unfortunately for Burns in my book, that will not happen in his lifetime. That will happen after he dies, which is the fate that befalls most poets, actually. And so those two things I want you to be thinking about, because I'm just going to read one more poem in his voice, because he's reckoning a lot in his part of the book with what is his complicity and what does it mean to try to be a good man, given what choices he has made. The other thing I want to say is the real biography of Burns is something I've hewed very closely to. He died at 37. All his life, he was beset by poor health, both of a physical nature, but also mental health. And that's important because that comes to bear on what happens in his time in Jamaica as well. And this poem, I think, is the last one I said. Toward the end of his time, he's reckoning with his failures. Crumbo Jingle is the Scots phrase meaning poems, songs. That's the title of this poem. Crumbo Jingle. Days fold into days, and I hold fast to snatches of heart songs learnt before the hearth. When, a child, I listened as my mother sang. I carried those airs across the sea. I bear them now as more and more I morph into another, a spirit absented from its host. Evenings, I return to this room to shape memory to music, whilst night stretches without end, taunting me to confront the rift in myself. The crumbo jingle, the poems I send for safekeeping, these songs I offer to the work of preservation, so faithfully. Could they salvage my life? Could they recover our voices, restore our better selves? They are all I have, and all that stays bedlam from overtaking me. In time, every man becomes the nightmare from which he cannot wake. As the clock strikes out the hour upon the hour. So Burns dies in Jamaica. That's toward the end of his life, that poem is written. He dies. And if you remember the fact that he's only there for 10 years, he never lives to see his daughter, her name is Agnes, grow up. In her adolescence, she's raped by that same Douglas that you heard about, the master, so-called master of the plantation. And out of that rape comes the birth of the speaker of the second half of this book. Her name is Isabella. She's Burns' granddaughter, with Nancy being her grandmother, and Douglas is her father. In childbirth, Isabella's mother dies, and she and her grandmother escape slavery in a circuitous path that I'm going to read a poem that explains. When her book opens, or her half of the book opens, we're in the 19th century now, and we're in Scotland. It's 1825. Isabella is 19 years old. She has just married and is turning 20. If you think back to that time of human development, that might be helpful to understand some of what Isabella is going through. It is the case that she is also grieving the loss of her grandmother Nancy, and her husband, who she's married to, a white Scotsman, doesn't know the truth of his wife's ancestry because she has been passing for white since she arrived in Scotland. So here's the story a bit about that. Springbank is the name of the plantation Isabella was born on, and this is her version looking back. Springbank was all the world I'd known. A child there, I was hers, Miss Nancy's kin. No matter this skin, these eyes belonging to his face. Your father could not look at you without seeing disgrace, was the only answer she'd relent to offer. Even when her life waned, she would not unlock the past. Tell me what she'd said that made him let us go. Why he paid and paid to send us away and away. We left first for Kingston, and a door closed behind us. A door I was never meant to open again. In Kingston, my grandmother was passed off as my slave. By the time our ship docked in Greenock, she was my servant, and we threaded into a tale so tightly woven, no one would guess my origin. What she sacrificed was everything of herself to see me freed But my father, you kent him and his world so intimately. What I've surmised will be no surprise. What Douglas understood was expedience. I was simply evidence. I needed to be erased. So I'm trying to keep a good rein on time. So I think I'm just going to read one more poem before I stop. But I'd love for you to hear a second poem in Isabella's voice that also brings into this collection a kind of memory that's very important to me to reckon with, and also that Isabella is reckoning with. That is the memory of the Middle Passage. And it is not one that Isabella herself possessed, but in the wake of her grandmother's death, her grandmother's memories of that fateful crossing from Ghana, from present-day Ghana, to Jamaica, which is where my African ancestry is traced, and many, many Jamaicans of African ancestry. That's where we trace our roots. Her grandmother crossed as a child, forced into slavery and taken from her mother. And Isabella's reckoning with passing, reckoning with the choice of whether to keep passing, is continually punctuated by that kind of memory. If anyone here is familiar with the question of epigenetics or the study of epigenetics, this is actually something scientists have looked into to ask the question of whether the survivors of trauma can actually transmit this kind of genetic memory, ancestral memory. This is in this book a fact. In real life, it is not. It is a question, but in this book, it happens to Isabella. So I will just read one poem in which she is being haunted by this. In the field. In the field lies the shipwrecked ship, broken mast and riggings, resembling an angel or bird fallen from a high place, wings splayed, feathers like a halo of the body. In this field, I wander the body of night, bereft of sight, or made bereft by sight of this vessel, stranded in a clearing, never meant to hold its form, unable to conjure the shape of longing every ship contains. In this dream of the field, I am the absence of ship, its hollowed out hull, the waves, the voices of the drowned beating against my ribs. And I cannot stop the cries, and I cannot unstopper my ears. As all night comes the tolling. Why have you survived, if not for this? So I think I will stop there and allow time, plenty of time, I hope, for questions, comments. Hello again, Paul.
Excellent. So Shara, thank you for sharing those poems with us. First, I'd like to start off with about a little bit more about the Penn State Laureate. If you could share how that came about for you, what the Laureate is all about, and maybe the platform that provides you over the year with that designation.
Sure. So I sort of alluded a little bit to this, Paul, in the beginning, but maybe I can be a bit more specific about some of the work I'm doing. The platform is the laureate position, somebody in the arts and humanities across the entire Penn State Commonwealth system, not just, I happen to be at UP, but it's not specific to faculty at UP. It's a faculty appointment, and you're nominated, and if you accept the nomination, there's an interview process and you submit materials to say, what might you want to do in this role? So it is meant to be a dual purpose, which is to bring attention to the work of the person who holds the laureate that year. What do they do in their art or in their scholarly enterprise as a humanist? And allow across the Commonwealth for that person's work to be proliferated. Equally important, at least in my understanding, but also to me, is that I'm an ambassador for the art that I am representing. And so in my case, it's an art. Last year, this position by a historian. I happen to be a poet who's interested in history, so maybe I'm also an ambassador for history of a different variety. But I go across the state essentially doing public readings. This invitation came out of that same impulse, which is how can I communicate my work to an audience, perhaps I think unfamiliar with poetry and poets who are living poets, but also how can I bring people to a better understanding of its value in our life and what it can do. So principally giving readings is one way that I'm doing that, Paul, like what you just heard. Engaging in the conversations with people who hear it and then might have questions for me about poetry. That's what I'm doing. Visiting a lot of classes. This morning I was in a class at UP, a poetry class where students are actually reading this book this semester. So I went in to meet with them, both to answer questions about the work, but also about poetry. I'm also hosting a radio program on WPSU, which is archived on the web. And so you can listen to these 4-minute clips. And these aren't about my poems. These are actually me choosing the work of other Pennsylvania writers, poets, to introduce to a listening audience. So those are the principal ways in which I am trying to embody this role as an ambassador for poetry throughout the year.
You're a self-described poet who is interested in history, and that interest certainly is reflected in your writing. Where was that cultivated? At what age, and kind of when did it kind of click for you that you wanted to pursue kind of an artistic way of telling historic stories?
So I think this book is the most dramatic example. I have not, before this, I wouldn't have said I was writing, a historical work of historical speculative fiction as a poet. It's in poems, but it does tell you a story across the collection that is akin to a novel or to an alternate account of history. Before that, Paul, I would have said I was doing this through a different angle, which is mainly autobiography. So looking at my story and my family's story, but not in a only, I hope, personal way, but understanding how these narratives that are individual accounts of our personal history, for me, they are always scripted against the larger backdrop of history. And I think that I was conscious of being able to articulate that I was doing that in the beginning, because like many, writers, you're becoming a writer by writing. You're learning what it is you have to say by saying it. And it's only looking back, I can see that this has been an abiding interest that has culminated in this book, which required a lot of research into. I mean, prior, I was dealing with materials that are of the time I am born, the last century, late 20th century into this century. So of course I didn't know all the subjects of the poems. It's not just about that, but I'm in the century that I know. This, I am not born in the 18th or 19th century. So this was an even more dramatic way to, and I'm clearly not Robert Burns. I may have a striking resemblance to Isabella, but I am not a 18th century Scottish poet as a man. So I say that because I think somewhere in your question is the idea that history is an account that's true. And what I'm interested in is what are the accounts that are left out of history? And what are the ways in which my imagination as a poet can fill in some of those gaps and silences in history?
Well, yeah, I think history is the true account of the storyteller, or as they see what the truth is, right? But there's always that untold story, right? If you're not the storyteller in history, what is being left out.
Right.
I
And
was gonna
women like,
ask- I was
I'm
going to
sorry.
ask if you fashioned Isabella after you, had you lived in the 17th or 18th century.
well, obviously I'm drawing on her. So my experience of passing, unintentionally or not, is one that Isabella is dealing with. And so I'm drawing on that to understand the existential question, like what is it that is causing so much grief in her? What is it that she feels, which is a sense of betrayal. She feels she's betraying her grandmother, right? She is, and I there's a lot that's going on in her section. Burns is becoming super famous. Her grandmother's dead, so the only person who knows who Isabella is gone. She's living a lie, you know. So it's a sort of story that's built out of some of the threads of my own experience, Paul. However, being a woman who looks white and walks through the world that way in the 21st century now, and even born into the end of the 20th century, when, by the way, my birth in America is still illegal in most states, right? I don't experience the fear that Isabella has. So that's not me. Isabella is beholden to her husband because she has no means to support herself in this time period in which women do not own property, do not have a right to an economic existence or sustenance. What will he do if he finds out that he's married to a Black woman, you know, that was born a slave? Like, he seems really like a great guy and super enlightened. I hope for her husband that he's not going to disown her, but she doesn't know that. She doesn't know that. I don't live with that kind of fear, Paul. You know, if it's found out in an American context, if Isabella were in the United States in 1825, she'd literally be remanded into slavery, depending on where she was. So those kinds of things that she's aware of, I don't suffer the consequences, because we want to understand race as something fixed. And I'm interested in looking at it as something that is rooted in geography. So place, time, and also politics, right? The racial codes that enforce racism are what are impacting Isabella differently in the 19th century than they are impacting me in the 21st century. So I hope that's, you know, that yes, she is me and she's not me.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you describe race in relation to time, in relation to geography. We were talking before we went live about your own immigration to the United States, right? And
yeah.
When you came from Jamaica and went to Miami, I wonder if your immigration experience, I would imagine your immigration experience was maybe much different than other immigrants, because as you pointed out, to immigrate to Miami, that was quote unquote maybe immigrant friendly, or there was at least, you were moving into communities of other immigrants.
Right.
Might have been different had you moved to other parts of the United States. And so I think the concept of, as I thought about your story and how you just described kind of the time and geography around concepts of immigration and race, it's really determined by where you are.
Right. And the particulars, which I didn't share, but I've written about these things, so I'm happy to share them, even though I know that for listeners, they may seem a bit difficult to hear. So this is just a warning. When I came, my father died. My parents stayed in Jamaica. So I add that to the mix because I think that, you know, each immigrant story is alike and different. But my experience of being separated actually from my parents and brought by my grandparents is actually more common than people understand. And so that's also Isabella's story. You know, she loses her mother. She has no parents, really. It's her grandmother who basically protects and raises her, both when she's on that plantation, and then it allows her to escape it. And so I say that just because when we talk about, you know, immigration, we often attend to one narrative. one sole narrative. And so I add that to the mix to say, yes, where you land, where you're coming from, what has made you leave the country of your origin, who are you coming with, how old are you when you immigrate, all of those kinds of experiences add up to really very different experiences of migration. So that's not so much it's just a comment to add to what you've already said, Paul, which is, yeah, that where I came to, I mentioned, but also how I came would impact how I experienced America. You know, I think about that a lot with, you know, teaching students even. I know that sounds sort of odd, but students are migrating when they go to university, even if they don't leave the physical place that they were raised. They're migrating because often they're leaving the culture that they were raised in, the familial structure that they look to for their source of understanding of who they were. And they have to reconstitute that in this new context now that they find themselves. And I'm interested in that action, I think, in this book. So it's an analog to what you're saying, but that I think maybe could broaden this conversation a bit to people to understand that migration has a political dimension that I don't want to lose sight of, but that if we could understand how all of us are thrown into the process of having to become new people and adapt, maybe we would become habitually more welcoming to the stranger or the ostensible stranger.
Can you take us through the creative process? You know, you mentioned that this work was different from your other works, which were mostly autobiographical in nature, were very based in Jamaica, or being Jamaican. But this was a little different. So how did this idea, or how did this kind of creative spark get lit? And maybe what's the next project that you're going on to after this one?
So I can answer the first more easily than the second at this juncture. The first is that it came from outside of me principally. So in a way, art to me is a meeting between the subjectivity of the maker and the materials that are the world outside of you, right? Sometimes that process, I think, for me has begun with examinations of things that are in me. So the autobiography, the notion of autobiography, threads of experience that I carry. This was different. And then I think the challenge is to see where the world comes in, if that's where it starts. This was, here's this story about history of Robert Burns, and it is disquieting to me. So sit with that and try to understand why it is bothering me so much. And if I could, I think this sort of links to one of the questions from Marcia Gambaroni that I noticed, which is, I'm going to hope I answer this a bit, Marcia, but if I don't, I can come back to the specifics of nostalgia and reality. But I think it does get at the heart of your question, which is, I can't be nostalgic about the past. I'm not, that's not my vantage point. I'm not wanting to be, but I'm also not allowed to be. The past, I know, isn't one that allows me to see only the beauty of Burns's poetry anymore, you know, or only the beauty of that song. I have to also reckon with the history of the man who was willing to go to work on a slave plantation. That's the thing that resists nostalgia, is realizing nostalgia, by the way, comes from the Greek nostos, which means return, and nostalgia means a corruption of that. Like, you cannot return, but you become sick with the desire to return. And out of that often comes the stories that we tell of the past that I think are really washing out the complexity of those histories. So yeah, I wrote the book because I couldn't live with the romantic notion of Burns only. I admire his work. I love his work. I admire some of his thoughts, but I can't live with a history that doesn't also grapple with how he had blindnesses too, right? So I think I answered the question, but Marcia, feel free to ask it again if I didn't. And I'm assuming, yes, there will be other questions coming in. too, but Paul, you may have others.
Yes, maybe it was an artful dodge, but projects that might be on the horizon for you. What
Oh,
are
yeah.
some things that are maybe percolating or things that you might be interested in diving into next?
So, I think what I'll probably work on, smaller projects for a while, translations. So like periodically, I like to translate from Spanish into English poems. So I would like to do some more of that. And I also work on personal essays, and I will probably be writing some more of those in the foreseeable future to put together a collection. Over the last 20 years, I've been writing personal essays for more than 20 years. And I think it might be a good time for me to be brave enough to put some of those into a finished form in a book form. They're also about race, memory, loss. I don't really think they're different inherently to the subjects I've been pursuing, but prose is much more direct. And why do I say brave? Because with a poem, I can always say, this is the speaker of the poem. This is the character of the poem. When you write a personal essay, you are telling the reader that the I is in fact you. You're making that kind of contract with the reader. So there's really nowhere to hide them in the personal essay. And so we'll see. I have a lot of things that I've avoided looking at for a long time. Even as much as I've been looking at some difficult things over time, there are others that I've avoided. And I will try to hold my feet to the fire.
So some of the things that I have read about your work and about you in particular, it seems as if part of, I don't want to say part of your mission, but I will, for lack of a better word, but part of your mission is maybe to confound the modern perception of poetry, of what we might think poetry might look and feel like. Is it safe to describe that and maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Paul, absolutely. And Marcia, by the way, I saw your response. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say that. I saw, in your question, what I hear rather is it the past tradition of poetry that I honor, or do I want to honor the living tradition that I embody? I am trying to embody both, actually. So that is to say, I love those earlier periods of poetry from those dead British men still. And I come out often in reminding people of that. And I love that I have read so much more that goes beyond that. And then I'm able to contribute to a living art form by bringing into it the perspectives of people who are not those dead British men, right? Both of those are true. So I just I hope I can make that really clear that I am not interested in the either or of poetry. I'm interested in the both and. Now, as far as where students are concerned, Paul, I think it is probably in the best interest of poetry's survival to start with the present. And part of the difficulty of for me as somebody who actually really loves also the past, I just love me some dead people. I just do. I don't know what it's about. I love when things sound different, actually. The language sounds different. We started this chat in the beginning. I'm fascinated by the sounds of language that I can almost understand, but don't quite understand. So even Middle English or Scots. But I understand from teaching that for many students, to start there is to turn them off from poetry, that they would do much better if we began with poets who are a little closer to their present moment, a little closer to who they see themselves. So obviously, wider range of gender, racial, other forms, class, space, geographic base. We need to have poetry that shows students that many, many people can be poets, right? And they can be poets. But I also mean it in terms of language. If we start with something closer to their ear, I think that it's like they realize this is something that's for them. and they can access. And maybe from there, then I can convince them too that they could also learn to love, Gerard Manley Hopkins, or, some of these people who have been gone a long time.
So you mentioned that you love writing about dead people, about.
I do.
And, from some of your previous works, some of the dead that you write about have been those who have been the closest to you, right?
Absolutely.
You've
Right.
written about your father's passing. Is that in a way how you continue to deal with the mourning over the loss and kind of grief? Is that your art helping you to deal with those close losses?
I imagine so, Paul, but it's hard for me to answer that question definitively, because art does a lot of things for me. Writing in part is definitely a way of coping, which is what you're asking. Is it a kind of method of articulating my grief and those losses? That's true. You know what else it is? It's a way for me to defy death, its finality. It's really, it's weird. I think of it, the elegy, the poem of mourning for the dead. It's also to bring the dead into the present with us. It's to make it so they can be with us still. And the trick, if that's the right word, is not to mistake the grief for the person. I have sometimes lost sight of that. As a writer and as a human being, I have honestly sometimes lost sight of that, particularly where my father is concerned. And I've also tried to write about that. But sometimes I have had to recognize that I don't have enough of the memory of him. So really the grief has supplanted who he was. And that's my thread to him. So every question you're asking me, I'm not trying to evade it, but I'm giving two answers because both answers for me feel correct.
Right.
Yes, it is a way to heal, if you will, from those fissures, but in a real sense, I think I'm just trying to make them more present for myself to look at them. And in doing that, then I feel more whole. Whereas other people, I think, prefer never to see the fissures. I keep using this analogy a lot, and it's from Japanese art, and I need to look it up. If you take a vase and you break it into many pieces, some people would prefer to repair it in a way where they maybe paint over the fissures when they're finished, so that you have the presence of the vase as if it were never broken. I prefer the vase where it's repaired and the fissures are still visible, right? That feels truer to me. And as a writer, then, my aesthetic and my ethical sensibility is toward that kind of vase making.
Yeah, there's
an answer.
No, there's an analogy in there. I want to say that it might be an old Hemingway quote where people are broken or they've broken a bone and it heals, is actually becomes the strongest part of that bone in the future, right? It's where we have overcome obstacles, right? It's those cracks or those fissures are often things that we turn into strengths. And so, yeah, that's definitely, it's definitely resonating with me. Take us into the classroom now. You are not only, a gifted and talented writer, but now you're trying to get that out of your students, right? So take us into the classroom and how do you get your students to tap into those kind of feelings for themselves and pour that into their art?
Well, there are many, many ways that I would say I approach this, but there are two principal ways. One is they have to read. So in my classes, students have to read books of poetry, not just individual poems. And the reason for that is that they usually have never read a book of poetry. So I'm trying to teach them how to sit with a poem, which demands a lot from a reader, and stay with one poet's subjectivity for a whole book. And that helps them to see what's possible for them to do in the art. As with any other art that you teach, you have to teach imitation for a long time, because that's how we learn anything. That's how we learn to speak. We hear it and we mimic the sounds. That's how we learn to draw, dance, walk. So in a way, I keep reminding students to read poems and to listen to poems also aloud, is to put yourself in the presence of the art form you want to make. That's one way I'd answer this, and it's the enduring way for me still. I'm still always a student of the art. Forever will be. I hope never to be otherwise, because then why would I bother? Right? I like to tell students, you need to humble yourself at the altar of poetry. It is so much bigger than any one of us. All we can hope to do is what we can contribute to that. So that's how I approach it, really. And then, of course, through practice is the other component here, Paul. When you're learning to do a thing, you have to do it many, many, many more times than you think is imaginable before you begin to really have proficiency. I'm not even talking about mastery. And this way of teaching for students at first is very daunting, I think, because writing is something, in poetry in particular, people just think, well, it's just whatever you feel. And what I'm trying to redirect them to thinking is that, sure, it's what you feel, but it's actually what you write. Feelings are secondary unless the writing is distilling those feelings more and more precisely, in the way you are capable of. So it is about you, but writing is what matters when you're writing. And they laugh because I say, in order to write well, you have to write well. So you can't just think about writing. You can't just yearn to write. You have to do it. So I give them a lot of exercises, essentially, that are formal exercises that are about practice. Reading and writing as practices, I think, go hand in hand anyway. And that's what I hope to inspire with teaching my students, is to continue to go back to those practices long after they've been with me for the ridiculously short time that a semester lasts.
Shara, if people are interested in finding more about your work or about getting your latest book, No Ruined Stone, where can they go to find that?
So the easiest thing to do, and I can just type it in, is to go to my website, which I finally, after very millions of years, made a website. I have to just figure out what it is. I think it's just my name. This is how bad I am at technology, guys. I think that's just it. That should work. But if you Google me, you'll find it. You can buy books of mine on any bookseller of your choice. It's available online or locally. And there's actually a wonderful, and no joke, I'm drinking from the mug of the bookstore that I would recommend, which is in Harrisburg, Midtown Scholar Bookstore. And they are actually selling signed copies, where there's a link on my website. So if you wanted a signed copy, you could get one. But I love to support them because they're just such a beautiful space. If anybody lives in Harrisburg or drives through, it's worth going to this bookshop to see it. It's just a really gorgeous bookshop. So
support your local independent bookstores. So yes, if you have the opportunity, go out and buy it from a local bookstore. Shara, thank you so much for joining us on the virtual speaker series and allowing us to feature a poet and poetry and the 2021-2022 Penn State Laureate.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
And we want to thank everyone else who's joining us on Facebook Live and here in Zoom. As a reminder, you can view a full listing of our events, both virtual and in person, at our website at alumni.psu.edu/events. Thank you for all you do for the university, for the glory, and for the future. We are
Penn State.